people here at Grant High School. Welcome to Grant High School's Armenian Genocide Commemoration Assembly. Today we're here gathered to remember the Armenian Genocide, which is the first genocide of the 20th century. And it's not just a history written in books, but it's a story carried by families, by communities, and by generations who continue to live daily with its impact. Remembering is not optional. It is essential, especially in a world where we still witness injustice. Acknowledging the past, even when it's not written in the history books, helps us recognize wrongdoing, stand against it, and strive for a more humane future. I'm so proud of this assembly because more than anything else we do during the school year, this assembly is created and produced entirely by our students in collaboration. And their work, they've been practicing, they've been thinking, they've been planning, has been many weeks and many months. I appreciate the dedication and the care and the commitment they share to honoring the truth. So the purpose of today's program is not just to commemorate the lives lost, but also to celebrate the resilience, strength, and the rich culture of our Armenian people. It's meant to educate, to deepen our understanding, and to ensure that these stories are never forgotten. This year marks the 111th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, and we frequently, as I mentioned, refer to it as being the first genocide in the 20th century, beginning in 1915, though the seeds of it began even earlier. This was one of the most devastating acts of mass violence in the 20th century, and more than 1.5 million Armenians were systematically killed by the Ottoman Empire. Families were uprooted, entire communities were destroyed, and a culture that had flourished for centuries faced near eradication. But beyond the staggering numbers is something deeper, a silencing, and the voices of those who suffered and perished were for too long ignored and denied. So that's why we're here, not just to reflect, but to raise the voices. Because remembering is not just a passive act. It's a declaration that these lives matter and they continue to matter. So you might remember, or you might notice the symbol of the forget-me-not flower throughout this commemoration. And for Armenians, the forget-me-not flower represents remembrance, resilience, and the enduring promise that the victims of the genocide will never be forgotten. Each petal, each part of the flower, stands as a reminder of memory, unity, and the responsibility that all of us carry forward. We also recognize that the Los Angeles Unified School District has formally acknowledged the Armenian Genocide and affirming the importance of teaching about the genocide and other genocides to promote understanding, tolerance, and respect for all people, and recognizing April 24th as a day of remembrance. This resolution reinforces our responsibility at Grant, here as our Grant community, to ensure that truth is taught, remembered, and honored. Being a witness today means being a voice for tomorrow, for immigrants, for the poor, and for the excluded. It means standing up even when standing up is uncomfortable. Earlier this year, I shared something that I learned recently about a Latino man who helped and stood up when the Japanese were being interned in our own country. And I shared with the audience there at that assembly that sometimes when we're standing up, we feel alone, but we're not alone. And sometimes we stand up for people even when they don't look like us, because it is important to stand up and to stand with what we know is right. Because standing up for others, speaking for those who can't speak for themselves, it's recognizing our shared humanity and realizing silence is not neutral. Silence is complicity. So today and always, we listen to the survivors, we hear from the witnesses. We are their voices when they're no longer with us or not able to speak. And let us not forget the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who reminded us that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And when we choose silence in the face of oppression, when we choose comfort over courage, we risk allowing history to repeat itself. Because injustice does exist around the world and in our own communities. We've seen the news, We know what's happening. We know that there are those who are marginalized, silenced, and targeted. So whether it's racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Armenian hate, attacks on individuals, we still have an obligation, and that obligation remains urgent. So especially in times of political uncertainty, when fear and division try to take root, our voices matter even more. So as we reflect today, I want to leave you with a call to action. This Friday, April 24th, is designated by LAUSD as an unassigned day, but it's not a day to go to the beach or to spend hanging out with your friends. It's an opportunity. I encourage you to do something meaningful, not just tomorrow, but anytime. You can go to the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Montebello, join a March for Justice, participate in acts of community service for any of the communities. Take time for personal reflection and remembrance. You'll hear things today, and I hope the things you hear today will linger with you. In our own community, we're surrounded by descendants of the Armenian Genocide, and we do have to think about those who aren't with us. Because all of us in this room know somebody who was impacted by injustice or atrocity throughout history. So the stories that you'll hear today, they are part of our shared human experience. And by remembering, we do honor them. By learning, we empower ourselves. And by taking action, we ensure that history is not repeated. I want to thank all of you for being here, for listening, and for choosing to remember. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalie Hayotian.
And I'm Vakhtui Chedrkyan. We are the co-presidents of Armenian Cultural Club.
We would first like to thank not only Principal McMurrin and the Lancer community at Grant for recognizing the importance and significance April 24th, 1915 holds in our hearts and memories, but also LAUSD and LA County.
We are gathered here today to honor the lives lost 111 years ago and to raise our voices to ensure such a tragedy never repeats. To begin, we will reflect on the events that led up to the Armenian Genocide and how it left a lasting impact for generations to come.
Before the rise of the Young Turks, a nationalist political movement which acquired power in the Ottoman Empire in 1908, Armenians lived peacefully in eastern Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. The empire was home to a diverse array of ethnic and religious groups, including Greeks, Jews, Syrians, and others who lived peacefully amongst one another. However, the consolidation of power by the Young Turks began to fuel nationalist tensions and anti-Armenian sentiment within the empire. Tensions turned into systematic destruction with the start of World War I in 1914, when Armenians and other minority groups were falsely accused of betraying the empire and framed as a threat to a unified Turkic state.
The 1.5 million Armenian deaths didn't happen overnight, but rather took years of organized violence and systematic efforts to destroy the Armenian people. The Ottoman Empire began by killing and arresting Armenian intellectuals and community leaders in Constantinople, leaving Armenians without leadership. The mass executions of Armenian men followed as it weakened the Armenian community and left women and children without protectors. This later escalated into death marches masked as deportations, where Armenians were forced out of their homes and sent on long marches along the Syrian desert, with many dying along the way due to starvation, exhaustion, and disease. The women and children who survived the marches were then taken into Turkish homes as slaves, forced to abandon their Armenian identity.
We would now like to introduce an informational video going more in depth on the horrors of genocide, followed by a series of performances conveying the tremendous suffering and pain of the Armenian community.
Turns against his own people. 1.5 million Armenians killed. April 24th, 1915, the beginning. Before this, there was life, community, culture, but this peace was gone. The destruction of Armenians did not begin with violence. It began with laws. In the final years of the Ottoman Empire, the Young Turks government built a legal system that made genocide appear official, controlled, and justified. Under wartime emergency powers, civil rights were suspended, the press was censored, and authorities were given the power to arrest and relocate entire populations without due process. Armenians were stripped of all legal protection. They were erased through paperwork. In May 1915, Techir law authorized the deportation of anyone suspected of treason. Armenians were never named directly, but the law's vague language allowed the targeting of nearly 2 million people under the appearance of neutrality. Soon after, the Ordinance of Abandoned Property created a system to seize Armenian homes, land, and businesses. Officials promised these properties would be returned. They never were.
1894 on, the Turkish government's planned policy of depopulating Western Armenia was ended.
By September 1915, the law of exploration and confiscation expanded these seizures further, taking everything: bank accounts, churches, entire communities. Armenian homes were redistributed to Muslim refugees, demonstrating that return was never intended. At the same time, Secret Directive issued in May 16, 1915 used bureaucratic language to disguise organized theft as routine governance. The government avoided words like killing or expulsion. Instead, it used terms like relocation and security. Genocide was hidden behind legal language. What appeared orderly was the foundation for destruction. The laws created the system. What followed was extermination. From 1915 to 1916, Armenians were systematically killed through massacres, executions, starvation, and exposure. This was not a wartime necessity. Deportations occurred far beyond active battle zones, revealing a broader goal: total destruction. Entire villages were wiped out. In April 1915, the region of Van, approximately 24,000 Armenians were killed in just 3 days across 80 villages. Men were often separated first and then executed. Even Armenian soldiers already serving the empire were disarmed, placed into labor battalions, and later killed. Mass killings took many forms.
They would be taken out and butchered.
Armenians were shot, stabbed, burned alive. Thousands were drowned in the Euphrates River, particularly near Deir ez-Zor. At Kamach Gorge, mass executions sent bodies into the river below. Women and children were burned alive in provinces like Bitlis and Deir ez-Zor. This was not random violence. This was planned extermination. Deportation became one of the primary tools of killing. Armenians were forced from their homes and marched towards the Syrian desert. These death marches were carried out with no food, no water, no shelter, and no medical care. People died from starvation, dehydration, exhaustion. Guards abused, robbed, and killed those who were behind. The journey itself was designed to kill. Those who survived the marches marched places like to Deir ez-Zor, one of the central sites of extermination. There, a network of camps held Armenians in conditions of extreme hunger, disease, and exposure. These were not refugee camps. They were sites of death. It targeted identity, family, and the future. Women and girls were deliberately targeted through systematic sexual violence. This was not incidental. It was a calculated strategy to destroy Armenian society. Rape was widespread and organized. Women were abducted during deportation marches and subjected to repeated assault, often in public or in front of their families. This was used to humiliate, terrorize, and break the entire communities. Tens of thousands of women were raped, abducted, and forcibly assimilated. Many were impregnated by their captors. This was not only violence, it was a method of erasing Armenian lineage and identity. Pregnant women were also targeted. Survival accounts describe soldiers killing unborn children in acts of extreme brutality, often carried out publicly to instill fear. Women were forced into marriages, sold into slavery, or placed into Muslim households. Many were forcibly converted to Islam, stripped of their identity, and abducted into new society. This was cultural destruction through the body. Sexual violence became a tool for genocide, used to reduce population, destroy families, and erase a people. Adults were eliminated, children were transformed. The forcible transfer of Armenian children was a central part of the genocidal policy. Thousands of children were kidnapped, separated from their families, and absorbed into the Muslim households, orphanages, or tribes. In many cases, mothers, facing death marches, gave up their children in the hope that they might survive. They knew survival would come at a cost: the loss of identity. Government policies systematically gathered children, boys typically under 12, girls up to 15, and placed them into state-run orphanages or distributed them to families. The state even provided financial incentives for their care. Children were forcibly converted to Islam. Their names were changed. Their language was forbidden. They were taught to forget who they were. Some were placed into homes as servants. Others were sold to informal markets or used for labor or exploitation. Older boys were often killed outright, while younger ones assimilated. Mothers disguised their sons as girls, cut their daughters' hair, blackened their faces, all in attempts to protect them from abduction. But many were still taken.
You were a slave in the Turks?
Yes,
Would you tell me about it?
yes, they dressed up Turkish costume.
The process was not random. It was organized through multiple systems: forced conversion, household placement, government redistribution, and institutional assimilation. The result was permanent. Children lost their names, religion, language, and memory. They survived, but as someone else. The genocide did not end with death. It continued through erasure. Armenian property was confiscated under laws labeling it abandoned. In reality, Armenians were deported and killed, leaving behind homes, businesses, land, and wealth that were systematically seized. These assets were redistributed to the state of Muslim populations, reshaping the economy. After the war, the Turkish Republic auctioned these properties publicly, using the wealth to build a new national system. Genocide became economic transformation. At the same time, Armenian cultural life was destroyed, deliberately and systematically. Churches, monasteries, schools, cemeteries were erased, repurposed, or left to disappear. The Cathedral of Kars, once the Armenian church, was later converted into a mosque, then a museum, and then again repurposed, its original identity repeatedly erased. The monastery of Varak, once a major Armenian religious center, was turned into a farm, stripped of its spiritual and cultural significance.
But the almost portion of the historic Armenian kingdoms and cultural contributions and monuments of all historic Armenia, but the almost premeditated, if not premeditated, allowance for those remaining historical monuments that survived the devastations of 1915 to 1920, either to fall into ruin or purposefully to destroy.
Destruction also took more direct forms. Historic sites like the monastery of Skank and the ancient basilica of Tekor were destroyed, in some cases through deliberate demolition or even used as military targets. Beyond buildings, entire landscapes were erased. Armenian towns and villages disappeared. What was once Armenian land was renamed, repopulated, and rewritten. By the mid-20th century, roughly 90% of Armenian place names have been changed. Even in scholarship and archaeology, Armenian presence was often ignored or relabeled, described only as Christian or Byzantine, removing their identity. This was not only destruction, it was the removal of a memory, a homeland without its people and without its history. The Armenian genocide was not a single act, it was a system of laws, of violence, of erasure. It destroyed lives through killing, communities through displacement, identity through assimilation, history through silence. And yet, memory remains. In stories, in survivors, in a truth that refuses to disappear. To remember is to resist erasure. To speak is to restore what was meant to be lost.
Thank you to our amazing performers who truly portrayed the power of the Armenian spirit. The song Opreru Oprid, meaning Surviving April, showcases how collective memory is a form of justice and choosing to live through the pain allows for cultural preservation. The dance, called Kilikia, was an independent state founded by Armenian refugees fleeing Seljuk invasions in the 11th century. This led to the creation of the Armenian kingdom of Kilikia in the 1080s. Kilikia, a sacred piece of Armenian land, was conquered by the Ottoman Empire in 1515, further highlighting how the Armenian people are repeatedly subjected to displacement, yet, despite centuries of loss, continue to preserve their identity.
The performances we just witnessed showed us the human side of this history, the pain, emotions, and lasting memory that carried through generations. The informational video produced by our volunteers and narrated by our amazing sponsor, Mr. Ostanian, now brings us to the facts. The facts which shaped and facilitated these experiences. Initially, we examined how the genocide of 1.5 million Armenians was carried out through legal and administrative mechanisms with vague laws that concealed the true intent of Ottoman authorities, presenting deportation while pursuing eradication. However, Ottoman efforts extended beyond the loss of life to the erasure of their identity, culture, and very existences as homes, property, and heritage were systematically taken. These policies were quickly translated into the reality of the genocide, where supposed deportations were revealed to be death marches across the Syrian desert. Individuals were not only deprived of basic necessities, but also their fundamental rights, facing abuse along the way.
Yet, even this does not fully capture the horrors of the genocide. Some of the most painful realities were faced by those who were most vulnerable, specifically women and children. Not only was rape used as a weapon of terror, but forced marriages to Turkish and Kurdish men were forms of cultural erasure, as women were typically the ones to pass down cultural values to their children. Pregnant Armenian women had their stomachs cut open to maximize Turkish control over the Armenian people, ensuring there isn't another generation of Armenians. The Armenian children who survived the death marches were kidnapped and placed into Turkish homes, forced to change their name and forget their Armenian identity. The Ottoman Empire wanted to ensure that young Armenians could not form new communities after the genocide. Therefore, children were placed in the homes of people who killed their family members.
This hatred towards the Armenian culture, however, was not the only driving force behind this genocide, but also the empire's desire for financial, territorial, and cultural gain. Armenian property and assets were seized, then redistributed through auctions, with the state being the principal beneficiary. They utilized illegally confiscated wealth to fund institutions and address the financial challenges the empire was facing during the war. Strengthening their power through Armenian property, the Ottomans proceeded to erase any hint of Armenian existence, demolishing churches and monasteries, then renaming them to rewrite the history of the lands. They attempted to strip us both of our material wealth and our historical legacy, believing it would erase our existence, our stories, and our identity. Yet memory proved stronger, persevered through generations, through resilience, and through the voices who survived. We will now observe the story of genocide survivor Samuel Karadorian, who at only 8 years old was a victim of violence and loss. We ask for your undivided attention. Thank you.
In Mazar, where we were living, the Turkish town crier came and said that, be ready, in about a couple of days, we're going to take you to another city. Nobody hardly believed that. But 2 days later, some of those gendarmes came and with their rifle butts hit the doors, get out over there and get into the bunch, and we're going to take you to another city. All we're doing is transporting you. And that night, on the outskirts of Malatya, they separated the boys and the men.
And not only that, on the shores of the Euphrates River, they piled us boys from 5 to 10 years old in a pile, and the gendarmes started with their swords poking into the pile. And this is the result of one of those pokings. I was lucky enough to be under the pile, and the saber blade, the point, just nicked me on the cheek. And then, while we were in a dungeon in Urfa, one of the little babies whose mother didn't have milk enough to feed the poor thing was crying. So in order to stop the crying, one gendarme grabbed the little baby by one of its arms, threw it up in the air, and the other gendarme caught it with his bayonet. And thousands and thousands of bodies used to be taken out from that dungeon in Urfa, because we didn't have no bread, we didn't have no facilities for anything, not even sometimes water to drink. And piles and piles of bodies were taken, thrown into the desert to the jackals or the vultures, or thrown in a pile, thrown some kerosene on it and burned it. These things I saw with my own very eyes, and out of a family of 7, only my mother and I survived. My father was picked up along with boys 10 years older and over in Malatya, and we never saw them. But that night there was a lot of shooting going on when it was dark.
And a boy about 15 years old, he somehow or other had managed to escape and came to the bunch and said that forget about it. All the men were killed by the Turks, massacred in cold blood. And so they dressed this boy into a girl's clothing and put some mud on his face so he wouldn't look like a beautiful girl, that the Turkish gendarmes wouldn't run away with him.
And during the night, my mother, my grandmother, who was really my mother's aunt, came, picked me up, and took me into their camp, and took care of my wound. It didn't harm me in any way, yet it's left, of course, an indelible mark in my mind, being scared of the Turks. And even now, 65 years later, I still have nightmares thinking that the Turks are chasing me and want to stab me and kill me. And they did that in order to get rid of all the males in our group, which was from Mazra.
That night, the mothers and the grandmothers and the aunts came and buried the dead boys with their hands, squeaking or scratching at the shores of the lake or the river, and some of them, they just pushed their dead children into the Euphrates River, and they down it went to the Indian Ocean. From there, they took us to Urfa. The first night that we were in Urfa, it was dark, a couple young men dressed in Arabic clothing came to our bunch. And they said, "Where's your men? Where you come from?" And we told our story. And they said, "Stupid people, and you let them kill you like sheep." He says, "It's not going to happen to us." They were Urfazis.
And finally, we arrived in Urfa. In Urfa, we were fortunate enough to get in touch with a Swiss missionary doctor, Dr. Jakob Kinsler. And my mother, knowing how to speak German, and also knowing the head of the German orphanage in Masra, got in touch with Dr. Kinsler. And Dr. Kinsler took us into his hospital where we remained. But a few months later, the Armenians in Urfa, knowing that what their fate was going to be is the same way as ours, so they start fighting with the Turks. They had the advantage because the Armenian section in Urfa had walls around it. But the Turks couldn't keep up with the Armenians, so they sent for reinforcements in Aleppo, Syria, where the Germans brought in 75 millimeter howitzers with a few shots knocking down the walls of the Armenian section in Urfa. They beat the Armenian.
Just a reminder that throughout this assembly, everyone must be respectful. Thank you. Samuel Karadorian was one of millions who endured unimaginable suffering, but what makes his story so powerful is that it refuses to stay in the past. Through his narrative, we don't just verify the facts of history, but we get exposure to the deeply rooted trauma that's caused by genocide. We see Samuel carrying the emotional weight of ignorance, showcasing that even small expressions of hate have the power to last a lifetime. By saying, quote, "Stupid people, you let them kill you like sheep," the autops inflict the blame onto the victims for the isolating Armenians and heightening their sense of shame. What seemed to be a minor remark from a stranger revealed to be far more powerful, one that stayed with him amidst all the violence he endured, serving as a reminder of the ignorance and hate he would always be defined by.
But his story does not end in suffering. In choosing to speak, his narrative becomes an act of resistance. It forces us to confront what is often ignored, challenging the indifference that allows such violence to be forgotten. His voice transforms memory into responsibility, reminding us that silence is not neutral, it comes at a cost. By listening, by remembering, and by sharing these stories, we begin to repay that cost. However, through Karadorian's narrative, we also come to realize that genocide did not end with 1.5 million victims. Its impacts extended far beyond death into memory, into lasting trauma, and into the lives of those who continue to carry its horrors. So no, it's not just 1.5 million victims, and it's not just 1,100 years ago. Its impacts remain today. Alina for the amazing delivery of Aznavor's famous composition, La Bohème, which alludes to the resilient spirit of the Armenian community. In the first part, we saw how genocide left Armenians with nothing. No homes, no possessions, and a crumbling identity, but their stories remained and helped rebuild the community and identity Ottomans once tried to erase. Memory translated into strength, growing little Armenias across the globe. As depicted in the map marking Armenian diasporas, the Armenian spirit is impossible to diminish and carries through generations.
Through this diaspora, Armenians did not just survive, they flourished. Take Alina Teryan, for example. She was an astronomer and physicist, often called the mother of modern Iranian astronomy, as she founded the first observatory in Iran and was the first female professor in the country. Raymond Vahan Damanyan is another example, as he invented the MRI machine, revolutionizing the field of diagnostic medicine.
Artem Pataputian, a molecular biologist and neuroscientist, was the first Nobel laureate of Armenian descent, known for his revolutionizing work on how the body detects stimuli. Anna Kazanchian was the first woman to earn a bachelor's in science from Columbia University in mechanical engineering. She supported the development of military systems and weather radar systems worldwide.
Yuri Oganessian is a nuclear physicist that discovered super heavy elements such as tennessine, a highly radioactive chemical. The element oganesum was named in his honor as he pioneered the use of heavy ion beams in nuclear fission reactions. Zabel Yesayan was the only woman on the 1915 Ottoman blacklist, as her contributions as a political writer undermined Turkish authority. After evading persecution, Yesayan worked with refugees and orphans, documenting their eyewitness accounts of atrocities, and played a prominent role in women's rights in Armenian communities.
Sebo Hanyan is a famous producer and screenwriter, most known for the movie Sinners. He received 16 Academy Award nominations. Charles Aznavour was a renowned French-Armenian artist, most known for his famous composition, La Bohème, as we just heard.
Artur Alexanyan is an Olympic gold medalist in Greco-Roman wrestling, often referred to as the White Bear, representing his consistent success on the international stage. And lastly, Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit, shaped modern online community structures and discourse. All of these individuals and many more demonstrate how Armenians have shaped the world on an individual level through culture, innovation, and achievement. However, this raises a much larger question. How has the global community responded? Has justice ever been brought to victims, dead or alive, who still continue to carry the horrors of the genocide?
While there have been efforts towards justice for the Armenian genocide, true accountability from those responsible has never been achieved. One of the earliest examples of this followed after World War I with the Ottoman trials of 1919 to 1920. During this, leaders responsible for the systematic destruction of the Armenian population were prosecuted for organized mass killings and forced deportations. Government records, witness testimonies, reports from provincial officials, and telegrams ordering deportations were all utilized as evidence for the trials, and several leaders were sentenced to death and found guilty. However, many of those convicted had already fled, and as political power shifted with the rise of a new Turkish nationalist movement, these trials were abandoned and undermined, with the uncovered evidence and findings being later suppressed or erased from official narratives and history.
These trials were the most accountability perpetrators of the genocide ever claimed. To this day, the Turkish government continues to deny the evident history and facts of the genocide. Justice has only been served with recognition from other countries and unions worldwide. So yes, 1.5 million Armenians were massacred, lands were stolen, history was rewritten, but it ends there. In just recognizing these events occurred. No consequences, no real justice.
In fact, it wasn't until after World War II and the Holocaust that genocide was formally defined under international law. In 1951, the International Court of Justice referenced the atrocities of 1915 when interpreting the Genocide Convention, helping establish a legal framework for prosecuting genocide worldwide. However, because the crime of genocide was not legally defined at the time, Armenians were denied the opportunity to pursue justice through international courts. In such absence of legal accountability, Armenian efforts shifted towards national recognition. Armenian American advocacy groups mobilized and lobbied for decades, achieving full congressional recognition by the United States in 2019, more than a century later.
Although recognition was a huge achievement, it was not the end of the story, but the start of a greater responsibility. One carried by individuals who refused to stay silent and ensure the Armenian story continues to be told. Today, we are honored to hear from someone who has carried this responsibility forward by strengthening the Armenian voice in our world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lilit Kashishian, a lecturer at USC's Writing Program and Project Manager at USC's Armenian Studies Institute.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Grant High School, for having me here today. This is a wonderful event and assembly. My name is Lilit Keshishian. Today I'm going to talk about the path that led me into the academic world and how things Armenian have shaped my work. Because I teach writing and I work with oral history interviews, I deal with narratives and stories all day, every day. I've always loved literature and reading. As an undergraduate, I was very excited to attend UCLA because it had a great literature department and had an Armenian history, language, and literature courses. In my advanced Armenian language course, I was assigned an entire novel to read in Armenian. By this point, I was reading pretty proficiently, but I had only read poems and short stories. And I didn't think I could actually get through a novel, but the class required me to do it, so I did it. This specific class introduced me to the contemporary Armenian literary world and placed Armenian literature on par with all the other literature I had been interested in and consuming all of those years. My journey as a comparative literature student began there. It was a perfect combination of all of my worlds. Eventually, I entered a PhD program in comparative literature, again at UCLA. After some exploration, I decided to focus my graduate studies on diaspora literature with an emphasis on Armenian literature written in the United States. I didn't make that choice out of a desire to advocate or to advance the Armenian cause. I made it because I really, really love the literature. Academia asks us to identify gaps and contribute something meaningful to a field of study. The study of Armenian literature, especially in the US context, was an area that needed deeper attention. These college courses and my instructors gave me the confidence, the language, the tools, and the agency to pursue this work. I want to stress that college courses, especially in the humanities, and even more so in fields outside of the mainstream curriculum, do not appear out of nowhere. They exist because people advocate for them. They fund for them, they sustain them. Armenian educators, Armenian philanthropists who made their money in very diverse fields, and advocates, all of whom believed in the power of education, created those spaces and opportunities that allowed me to be introduced to the work and to contribute to it. Eventually, I began teaching my own gen ed courses at UCLA. I was assigned a course entitled Comparative Literature, the Age of Enlightenment to the Present. I could pick any books I wanted to teach within that time frame. One of the privileges of being in this position is that I can shape, even in a tiny way, my students' view of the world. One of the 8 literary texts I assigned that first quarter was a translation of Armenian writer Hacop Karapents's short story collection. It went really well. The next quarter, I assigned Rafi's Khent, or The Madman. It was published in 1880, and it's one of the most famous Armenian novels. When my department told me to teach a class on epics, I taught Homer's Odyssey, and then I also assigned a translation of Sasun Si David, or David of Sasun, that epic. That quarter, last minute, in a leap of faith, I asked my actress and professor aunt to come into class and read the epic in Armenian, parts of it. It ended up being my students' favorite part of the class, to hear the epic performed in its original language, even though they didn't understand any of the words. My research and education enabled me to place Armenian literary texts in conversation with the larger global literary canon. It introduces my students and my colleagues to Armenian literature and film they would likely never have encountered otherwise. My job as an educator, an oral historian, a digital archivist are not direct advocacy, but they're shaped by advocacy and they enable advocacy. Advocacy needs to be rooted in information and education. Stories in their many forms shape how we understand the world and how we act within it. Through my work, whether in the classroom, in the archives, or in my scholarship, I try to equip others with the knowledge they need to understand what they are advocating for. I'm going to transition a bit and talk about some of the work I do with the Armenian community through my work at the USC Institute of Armenian Studies. So I direct the California History through Armenian Experiences Oral History Project. It focuses on the power of individual stories. This oral history project documents and highlights the diverse and intersecting histories of Armenian Americans living in California. Basically, I go to people's homes and I interview them for hours, 2 hours, sometimes 10 hours, multiple days, and I get their entire life story from their ancestry to the present. These are eventually going to be cataloged and then made available to scholars, researchers, and anyone else interested in the Armenian experience, specifically the California Armenian experience. The oral histories provide individuals of all backgrounds with access to the histories of California communities, deepening their understanding of their neighbors and the forces that shape their surroundings. Did you know that one of the oldest bookstores in Glendale, California is called April and is an Armenian bookstore? It was first established in Hollywood, then moved to Glendale, and was founded by brothers Harut and Nubar Yeretsian, who fled the Lebanese Civil War in the 1970s. After Harut's death, his son Arno took over the business, which he still runs today. It is a labor of love that serves the Armenian and non-Armenian community alike. Arno Yeretsian's life story is now archived at USC. Do you know about Joan Agajanian Quinn? She's a journalist and renowned art collector, widely considered as one of the most painted women, and was a good friend and muse to prominent artists like Andy Warhol, Basquiat, among others. I think she's been painted more than 300 times by mostly famous artists. Her grandfather had a hog farm in Los Angeles in the 1920s that turned into one of the first waste management industries in California. Joan Quinn's life story is now archived at USC. Alan Gendyan, who's now 88 years old, is a major figure in the Fresno Armenian community. He was also a friend of Pulitzer Prize winner William Saroyan. At one point during our interview, Alan Gendyan tells us the story of going to Armenia with a delegation to spread William Saroyan's ashes. So William Saroyan, when he died, he essentially wanted his ashes to be spread in Armenia. During the Soviet Union, if you wanted to go to Armenia, you first had to stop in Moscow to get background checks and have a delegation kind of follow you there. And so he recalls keeping William Saroyan's ashes under the covers in his hotel while he slept so that no one would steal them during the nighttime. Alan Gendyan's full interview is also at USC's Digital Library. I share these examples not only as representations of my work, but to highlight the significance of individual stories. Armenian stories are global stories. Arno Yeretsian's family history teaches us about the Armenian genocide, about the Lebanese Civil War. It is the history of immigrant communities in Hollywood and Glendale. Joan Agajanian's Quinn story begins with some of the earliest Armenians in Southern California. It is a story of industry, of farming, of even race car driving. Her uncle was a major person in the race car driving industry in California. She is art history. Alan Gendyan's story gives us essential details about Armenian Fresno, probably the oldest Armenian community in the United States, along with some areas of Boston. All of these stories enrich the Armenian American record. The theme of today's assembly is the cost of silence and the power of memory. Speaking up takes many forms. It happens in different rooms, across different professions, and in different ways. But speaking up effectively also requires the willingness to listen and learn, and I echo what your principal said earlier today. I am indebted to the interviewees who have shared their life stories with me. I am indebted to the instructors who expanded my understanding of the world through lessons on everything from Chicano literature to the history of India to Italian cinema. These stories opened my eyes to new worlds and new ways of seeing. Armenian stories do the same when we choose to tell them, when we choose to share them, and to carry them forward. Education, in this sense, is a form of activism. It builds agency and gives us the tools not only to remember, but to respond. Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Lilith, for sharing your amazing story with us and your commitment to the Armenian cause. We would now like to introduce one of our amazing club members to sing Donim Hayreni. amazing performance. We would now like to highlight how the Armenian genocide still echoes to this century. Artsakh, a small region in Armenia, has been repeatedly been exposed to violence and threats from Azerbaijan starting from 2022 during the humanitarian crisis when they were held without any food, medicine, or water for 10 months. About 150,000 Armenians were forced to flee their lands due to this and leave their ancestral lands behind.
We would also like to take a moment and thank every single club member, volunteer, and speaker who made this assembly possible. You are not just participants, you are a part of a much larger youth movement that is continuing the Armenian cause. The next generation carrying truth and ensuring that our stories continue to be told.
And so, before we leave here today, let us remember what this all comes down to: the cost of silence and the power of memory. Thank you.
All right. We're now just gonna dismiss you for lunch because we have a special way of doing that via Mr. Henriksen and his band. All right, it's all you.
1, 2, ready, go.